I am acutely aware of the fact that I'm probably one of a handful of lawyers in this room. And I'm also acutely aware of the fact that Pajam's a tough act to follow. I drew the short straw today, coming after him. I think when we look at the issue of smart contracts, and what astounded me yesterday is the extent to which almost every speaker referenced smart contracts, right? 5 years ago, we were talking blockchain, we were talking use cases. Smart contracts was nowhere on that radar. And look at how far we've come, right? Everybody's looking at it, and I think everybody recognizes the potential and the use cases for it. But I think smart contracts, and what I call smart contract 2.0, I think it requires a lot more than just technology. We require an ecosystem, and I think we require the legal profession to step up. We need the lawyers and the legal profession to step up. You heard Fajam talk about the blockchain. Doesn't mean that we're losing the need for government. We're not losing the need for regulators. And I'd like to add to that, we're not losing the need for law. So where do we go from here? Contracts have been around almost as long as human beings have been standing and walking on 2 feet, right? We traded one chicken for a bag of apples. We used to trade, we used tokens, even in those days, shells. We progressed to money. And underscoring all of that was a legal system that developed to deal less with what went right, but more around what happens when things go wrong. Because life happens, right? People go insolvent. Businesses move on. Competition enters. There are disasters en route in terms of delivery and logistics. Things happen. And I think that if we're going to be looking at smart contracts in the context of code and technology alone, I think we're missing the trick. I think it's half the story. So we've had contracts in the law. Technology has brought us so far. Look at how technology's revolutionized every single aspect of our lives. How we communicate, how we interact, how we meet people on social media, right? It's fundamentally changed the way that we live. And the law has had to run to keep pace. From a South African perspective, I think we've been really lucky. We've had laws since the early 2000s, which effectively acknowledge and accept the validity of online contracts. Electronic signatures. When we negotiate, we no longer negotiate face-to-face. It's really rare. We do it via VC, Skype, WhatsApp even, emails. The world has moved on, and I think the advent of smart contracts brings with it new challenges. And what we have to do is we've got to test our legal system to see, does it measure up? Not just against what smart contracts can do today, but what smart contracts can do for us in the future. And it's important that we have this dialogue now, that we have this narrative, and we open the narrative to the legal implications now. Why? Because half of you in the room are building the architecture and the systems that are going to bound the smart contracts going forward. And we need to build them right first time, now. To do that, we have to engage and we have to have this dialogue. So I'd like to, on a show of hands, I'm going to ask for your engagement here. How many of you have been a party to a smart contract? All of you. Right. Now, what if I were to tell you that smart contracts have actually been around as long as the vending machine? Right? Money in, machine does what it needs to do, and out pops a chocolate bar. I'm going to ask that same question. How many of you have been a party to a smart contract? Thank you. So smart contracts have actually been with us for quite some time, but it's only with the advent of the blockchain, particularly Ethereum, that was the real catalyst to open up this narrative. It's only since then that we've really starting to see the benefits, the potential of smart contract, what I call 2.0. And our law needs to keep pace. We need the legal profession and the legal regime to step up. To do that, though, we can't do it alone. You saw yesterday a couple of examples of what a smart contract could look like, right? But that's purely focused on the code. And I think that if we start discussing and building the ecosystem for smart contracts purely around the code, we're trying to build a cake with half the ingredients. We're building a Ferrari with tires only on the passenger side. It's only going to take us so far. So let's get this right first time. Technical code and legal code, right? The technology, the binary logic that drives the code, the pre-programmed rules, is actually not that different from legal code. When I draft a contract, and I have to say, I am very fortunate in that I've had many opportunities in my career to do more than just law. I've worked with developers, come to work in my genes. It's rather liberating, actually. And I have helped scale and grow businesses from naught. And to do that requires a slightly different mindset. So for those of you who've come today hoping, anticipating a traditional legal presentation, apologies. The legal code, the way that we draft contracts, is very, very similar to writing a program. We pre-program the rules, we drop in an input, and out pops an output. A transfer of ownership, a sale of shares, a loan. And I think there are ways that we can marry the two. But we have to start speaking the same language. Tech code, legal code are designed to achieve the same result. And there's no reason we can't be building smart contracts that can do what the technology says it can do on the box, but at the same time is going to give effect to a legally binding, valid, enforceable agreement. So what do I mean by a smart contract? I think it looks something like this. We've got to take the tech code and we have to build it in such a way that we're creating a smart contract that is automated and self-performing, right? That's the tech part of it. But at the same time gives effect to valid, enforceable rights and obligations between the parties. It also needs to take account of the other layers of law which perhaps we've not anticipated. You have a car. What color is it? White. Let's say I'm in the market for a white car. I want to buy your car and you're happy to sell and we agree a price. Okay? So I agree to buy, you agree to sell, we agree on a price. Let's say it's 100K. We agree. Don't hold me to this. I'm not going to hold him to it either. Just for purposes of example. So we can agree, right? We can probably write that sale agreement on a napkin, right? And it's valid, it's binding. We've got a legal system that will accept a verbal agreement. Doesn't have to be written. Doesn't have to be in a particular language. We could do this in Mandarin if we wanted to. But it presupposes that we both understand what we're agreeing to. It presupposes that we have a shared intention. Contract law is built on consensus and common understanding. So we've got to build it in a way that we marry what the technology can do with what our legal system requires from a legal contracting perspective to actually give it valid, binding force and effect. And I think in that way, we can take 1 + 1 = 3. And if you take nothing away from my presentation today, it's that little circle at the bottom I'd want you to remember. 1 + 1 can make 3. I don't believe that we are going to be able to take smart contracts into 2.0, 3.0, etc., unless we get this right. And we've got to do it now. There are lots of definitions around smart contracts. This is one that I rather like. It talks about a smart contract being automatable and enforceable and an agreement, right? It's automatable by the computer. That's the giving effect to that auto-performance, that self-performance, that guaranteed performance. And it's enforceable either by virtue of the technology itself. We agree, we push go, and we start the wheels in motion. Auto-performance and guaranteed performance. That's the real benefit, right? But it needs to be underpinned by enforceability and validity in terms of the legal system. That if something goes wrong, you and I can draw one. And what will it look like? We saw some examples yesterday of what I think a coded type of smart contract may look like. There are different models. So there's something that some commentators call the external model, where we start with our original prose agreement. And they can get very chunky. I'm negotiating a contract at the moment. I kid you not, it's 800 pages. This entire agreement, it looks like this. I'm probably partly responsible for what's happening in the Amazon alone. But these are big, chunky agreements. We're not talking simple agreements that can be drafted on a napkin. And the external model says we take this prose contract, we leave it unamended, right, as is. We take it and we now translate it into code, which embeds in it the auto-performance. So we have my prose contract, my full 800 pages, plus the code which will actually drive the implementation of those provisions. That's one model. On the other side, we've got a purely coded contract. No paper. You and I actually, by agreeing, we encode it right now. And that is the only record of our agreement. And I have to say, as a lawyer, that doesn't frighten me. I foresee a world where some of our contracts might well be written in code, first and only. It's not inconceivable, but to do that, you and I both need to be able to understand what that code means, and I think the way that we write it needs to give effect to the body of law that's come through the ages. The implied terms that get overlaid into any contract. Issues around insolvency, issues around regulator oversight in certain circumstances. Not good enough for us to agree, let's say I'm buying a container of apples, right? If we agree that I'm buying a container of apples, but it transpires that in fact the containers are being used for human trafficking or something dreadful, the regulators would need to access and intervene, right? There are shocking examples where what you and I agree is not enough. Life happens. And we've got to build these contracts in a way that are going to give effect to that and the multiple permutations that can come from that. So pure code contracts don't frighten me. But I think it's going to require a shift. A shift on the part of technologists and a shift on the part of lawyers. We've got a long way to go before we get there. But I think it's not inconceivable. So I think a smart contract is something that looks like this. You've got party A agreeing something with party B. And perhaps there are multiple parties. This is a simplified version. And that agreement is underscored by both technology and law, bless you, to create a smart contract. But that then has to back end into an entire ecosystem because there are other moving parts to give effect to that smart contract. What do we need? We're going to see the rise of oracles. Some of the speakers already have mentioned and have touched on the need for these oracles and the important role that they're going to play. I look at, for example, the work that Thomson Reuters is doing, some incredibly good work in this space. It's stepping up to try and create a role for trusted third-party databases that are going to allow us to push forward with smart contracts. So, for example, in the insurance space, imagine a world where in a crop insurance environment, right, how hard is it for the insurers to sign up farmers? He's sitting on his tractor in the middle of his field, and then to actually give effect to the claims process. It's perhaps weather dependent, etc. It's not an easy process. I can imagine, and I can foresee a world where there's online contracting, The farmer sits on his tractor in the field, uses his mobile phone, clicks to accept, starts the wheels in motion. What has he done? He's effectively taken out a policy for crop insurance. Say that's weather, dependent on weather. You have an oracle, let's say, like what Thompson's is I understand looking at, collating weather patterns, such that if in a particular region over a period of, let's say, 2 weeks, there are temperatures that exceed a threshold, let's say 40 degrees, right? Let's say it's a given that grapes will not grow in excessive temperatures for more than, of more than 40 degrees. And in that event, that triggers an automatic claim on the part of the farmer and an automatic payment by the insurer. Amazing and not inconceivable. And that requires oracles. I've put the bank in this. And by bank, I mean bank with a small b, not bank with a capital B. I'm talking about payment providers, digital wallet providers, crypto providers, token providers, store of value providers. And there may be many more still to come that we haven't even begun to think about. Those that manage the systems that effectively store the value for me and for you, that you and I can then use to contract further down the line. And we need systems to talk to each other. This issue of interoperability is a key challenge for making smart contracts and the smart contract ecosystem work as it should. And of course, multiple other players in the system. As the use cases for smart contracts develop, we'll be able to start filling in those gaps. There are a lot of benefits to smart contracts. Let's not kid. It's going to make life easy. Improved efficiencies, transparency. That's one of the real benefits to this, particularly if we look at smart contracts in the public procurement space. Reduced costs. There will be disintermediation along the way. It'll come with reduced costs. Risk reduction. And I've put here no disputes. I should have put a question mark on that. I think it's going to reduce disputes, but I don't think we're ever going to get away from disputes. Disputes happen. Why? Because life happens. And I think the real benefit is guaranteed performance. When you and I agree that I'm going to buy your car, we push go, push the red button, we start the wheels in motion. You know that I'm not going to back out, and I know you're not going to back out. We've put in place measures that you know that on the date of transfer, the money will transfer, the value will transfer. Guaranteed performance. But it comes with multiple challenges. I've put a couple of them up on the screen, and I've highlighted in blue those that I think are specific to smart contracts. All the rest probably could be said of any type of online contracting. We've spoken about the legal effect. Is it valid? Is it enforceable? I think issues of jurisdiction are particularly hard to solve. Bajam gave the great example of the coin that doesn't cross borders. It's the same for law. We've got regulators in different countries that have different rules, and it's very hard for us to design systems that will cross borders and territories in a seamless way. It's a real challenge. I've put tax on there too, because where there's trade, the taxman's never far behind. And we need to build these systems and build these contracts in a way that are not going to expose players to multiple tax, double tax. We need to be careful of that. Identity. For you and I to contract online, we need a valid, verifiable identity mechanism. And that, I think, is to a large extent what many of you are working on, blockchains on blockchain, to solve that problem. Privacy, confidentiality, insolvency I've touched on. And insolvency is important because that's one of those intervening factors that can happen outside of what you and I are agreeing. You agree, I agree, but before payment happens, one of us goes insolvent. What happens then? It taints the payment that would then be guaranteed. Potentially can be pulled back by the insolvent estate. Multiple permutations, which a simple smart contract written on a napkin might not be able to solve. Regulator oversight, I've touched on the oracles, and engagement of the real world. Bajam, I don't even need to go there. You've covered it beautifully for me. How are we going to get the smart contract ecosystem properly, efficiently, and without risk to connect in and draw on the data coming from the real world. It's tough. Not insurmountable, but it's one of those challenges we need to address. And interoperability I've spoken about. Intention is a tough one. And I think until we can get to the point where you and I can both read code, write code, and understand exactly what it means, what we're giving effect to, I think we're far off having checked the box of consensus. Permutations is another one. How do we write code in a way that is going to address all permutations? Contract lawyers have been trying to do that for centuries, and we build on what went before. But it comes from experience, and it comes from issues that have arisen in relation to similar transactions in similar sectors. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Why? Lost in translation is another one. We've got contracts and contract law principles that have come through the ages for good reason. Issues like reasonableness, good faith, best efforts. There are only developers in the room who can write code to govern those at this stage. Tough one. And I think until we get to a stage where code can solve that for us, I think the challenge sits on us as lawyers to write contracts in a different way. We've got to, if we're writing or we're giving effect to smart contracts, we have to start thinking and applying Boolean logic. We've got to start using true-false binary mechanisms to actually craft the framework for that contract. Warranties. It's not going to work for me to warrant, or for you to warrant that the car is in good working order. How are we going to give effect to that? For a smart contract, somehow we'll need some kind of independent verification of that state of affairs. So this lost in translation, I think, is a key element of this. We cannot lose sight of the fact that we're trying to pull together two worlds, and we need to start speaking a common language. And security is a big one. Trust. DAO hack happened. Life happens. Now we get onto the exciting part. And I think no discussion on the blockchain is complete until we've fleshed out some of the use cases. And this will change over time. When I give a presentation like this in 6 months' time, no doubt I will have added multiple new categories. So let's start at the top. Financial services, that's the sharp edge of the sword here in relation to smart contracts. This is where we're seeing all the action. Blockchain Consortium, Fasham, I'm looking at you here, and Saab, I know you've been playing around with, we've actually given effect to smart contracts in relation to asset trades. It's happening, it's live, and it is possible. ISDA, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, the derivative contracts it's a good example and a great use case for a smart contract. Anyone who's ever tried to unpack a derivative agreement will know how complex and complicated they are. They're complex margin calls. There are formulae that go into calculating margins and exposures that then give effect to automated payments. ISDA is doing a huge amount of work in this space, actually together with Linklater as our global alliance partner. And a lot of work is being done in that space. Guernsey has last year, in collaboration with the Northern Trust and IBM, there's a private equity trading platform, which they've just launched, with the blessing of the regulators, to administer and manage private equity funds and to facilitate trades of private equity investments by means of smart contracts. Huge use cases. Procurement. And this is one that I think, as an African, and for those of you who live in Africa and who breathe the African air, I think this is one of the key use cases for us. Imagine a world where governments and procurement, state procurement, is all done on the blockchain in an open, transparent manner, in a manner that's not discretionary, and in a manner that we can track provenance of transfers. Good place to be, right? For Africa, I think that's one of the major use cases here. It can work. In the States, they're already doing it. In America, they're already doing it in relation to logistics. I see activity in the healthcare space, procurement of devices for border control. A lot is happening in that space, and there's no reason we can't be bringing that here to this continent. Property, we've touched on it countless times. Ghana is a really good example. So up until about 18 months ago, the Ghanaian land registry was symbolic. There was no trade in property. There was no way in which individuals who owned property could prove and verify ownership. It meant that they couldn't take out loans. Banks were not prepared to lend off the back of the title deed. There were scams. People found their homes were sold out from under them, to the extent that there were homes in the country where people had graffitied on their own home, "This house is not for sale," to try and avoid that. So the blockchain has stepped in, a great initiative, which I understand is now being rolled out to Kenya and one or two other countries, around establishing a verifiable, secure deeds registry that can verify land, title, and ownership, can be used to open up trade of property, and can open up a secondary market. Can you imagine what that can do for an economy? Insurance, I've already touched on, my crop insurance example. And then I ask myself, are we heading for a world where every contract will be a smart contract? I think that's probably a bridge too far. I think we will find there are contracts that just don't fit. Marriage contract is a good example. And then I think the most exciting place for us is in the upper block. New contracts. Contracts we haven't even begun to think of. New contracts, new possibilities, new prospects for trade and commercialization that prior to the blockchain, prior to smart contracts, did not exist. And I think now that we've reached the end, I'm going to take us back to the very beginning. The extract from the Ethereum website. Designed to enable developers to create markets, store registries of debts or promises, move funds in accordance with instructions that were given long ago, and many other things that have not been invented yet. So I say to you, there's a call on you as technologists to start building systems, building technology and ecosystems that can accommodate the wealth. You know, someone said to me the other day, it's not smart contracts we need, it's wise contracts. Smart contracts that can do what the technology is capable of, but that draws on the wisdom of our entire legal system and doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's the challenge that I'd like to leave with you as technologists. And for the handful of lawyers that may be in the room, that's the challenge that I leave for you. We've got to step up. The legal profession needs to step up. We've got to start doing law differently. And we need to start changing law if necessary. If we're ever going to allow this prospect of smart contracts to achieve and change the world like I think it can. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexia. Do we have questions?
Thank you. Have you looked at the Open Law app under the Consensus website, which we are producing all the contracts on open source, and we would encourage you to sign up because we are opening this so that all the contracts would be already pre-populated and programmed in smart contracts.
Sounds amazing. I haven't done it, but I'm going to do it when I leave here.
Cool.
Thank you. Any questions?
Morning, Alexia. I think that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. What do you really feel is the role that legal firms can play, and then secondly, should play within the South African landscape to make sure that smart contracts and the future that you see is actually a possibility?
So I think there are a couple of things. You know, I work at a law firm which is this year celebrating our 150th year anniversary. We've been around for 150 years. And we didn't get here by staying the same. We got here by changing. And when I hire new lawyers, when I look for new lawyers to join my team, it's a given. They've got to know the law, right? It's a given, and they've got to be really good at what they do. But I'm looking for something else. I'm looking for lawyers who not only can survive on change, but who can thrive on change. The world is changing, and the law has to change with it. And if we are going to sit back and think that we can carry on doing what we've been doing for 150 years, we're wrong. I don't know if that answers your question. Does that answer your question? I think we just have to do things differently, and we have to move with the times. But I think we must do so in a sensible manner, and I think that we need to draw on everything that comes with our existing legal system. And our South African legal system, I have to say, has done really well in keeping pace with broadly a lot of the developments. I mean, we've got laws that will effectively bind me to a contract if I get a bot to conclude it for me. We're already there in certain circumstances.
Thank you, Alexia. I think we will have to close it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.